So a big question that continues to run through the minds of a lot of superhero video games aficionados is why has Superman been abandoned over the years? When it comes to video game production, it appears that the hero, the character, seems to have been largely ignored from the entire mainstream. Now, I've made a lot of different videos talking about my theories on why I think a Superman game can work, stories that will work from a narrative perspective, story that could work from even a gameplay perspective, and even potentially, but I have never mentioned this, gameplay frameworks that could also work. Now, I'm not going to mention those on this video. Those ideas are too precious to me to throw down in a YouTube video. But I think there are still other aspects that we can also discuss in all of this conversation. So let's look at the nature of the character. Let's look at the nature of development, and let's look at the nature of the financial and fiscal aspects of video games that have somewhat contributed to the entire Superman franchise having some kind of a weird, representation when it comes to video games, especially. Because in the TV shows and the TV series, we see Superman. In the movies, we also get to see Superman. Like it or not like it, judge it for whatever you want to judge it for, you'll still see that the character has a little bit of that cinematic and, mainstream appeal. But in the video game side, overall, we just have not seen a lot from the character as we did at one point when a lot of Superman games were produced. So what are the pertinent issues? I think number one is not necessarily the fact that Superman is OP. A lot of times this argument will come, into question. Superman is OP. Well, if you actually look and see the wealth of literature and lore, you'll realize that so-called OP Superman continues to have obstacles and things that continue to challenge his so-called strength. And he, in many cases, will find himself on the back foot and eventually overcome. Writing a hero with no weaknesses or few weaknesses is actually quite silly. And I don't think the original creators, as well as the creators who pursued writing Superman stories, were idiots. I think they did a very good job in the originality. So where is this OP-ness coming from? I think the OP aspect is coming from the more modern representation of the character. We're forgetting the way the character was originally written, and somehow he's been made almost invincible in the more modern forms of media. But if you were to just draw back a little bit, say to somewhere around the mid-90s, you're going to see that even, say, the animated library of different media for Superman showed him in a place where he had a lot of vulnerabilities. Now, yes, the vulnerabilities were not consistent because sometimes something could make Superman a little bit vulnerable, and then at the same time, another thing of equal power or as an equal force against him could be easily overcome by him. But it was one of those things where Superman as a character did not always depend on pure strength. And because of that, they really made him to be a character that you could actually see that he was still going to have his struggles regardless. They wrote enemies, they wrote villains, and they wrote all kinds of different things that would pretty much give Superman a very big challenge. But as time began to go on, the Man of Steel began to take on this interesting image. I think the Man of Steel movie by Zack Snyder is probably my favorite Superman depiction. But in that particular movie, Superman is super OP. And remember, I just jumped all the way from some animated movie to through a whole plethora of other Superman media and jumped to the Zack Snyder one. The reason is because all those other Superman old movies, I never really watched them. I mean, I saw them as a kid and I was like, why do these movies look somewhat boring? It wasn't until sometime around the TV show Lois and Clark that I really did enjoy Superman, which is crazy. I was a young lad when that show came on TV, But what I really enjoyed about that show was Superman was just a regular guy in that show. They made him this romantic figure in a sense, but it showed that he was very human. And I think that really did make me appreciate the character more. It was much closer to the depiction of the character than him always having to deal with all of these, interesting forces and become really strong, even though those other movie depictions, the ones that I got to watch anyways, were able to show him as somewhat vulnerable and also being able to overcome obstacles. So I think these two characterizations, both the characterization of him being somewhat very vulnerable in a sense from the old media, and then him being super strong from the new media, is causing a kind of a rift for the character. The character has not been, fortunate to have the consistency that some other characters like Batman has had. And so this is a very interesting thing. Now, when we look at technology, what has been going on in the past few years? Well, if we think about the technology side, we also have to maybe talk about, say, maybe the financial as well, because that's also a big deal. When it comes to the technology side, you look at, say, maybe game development and the possibilities in game development. As of today's day and age, or in fact, I would say for the past maybe half decade or more, there has been technology that can actually make a Superman game. I know that may be somewhat surprising, but time just flew by. That's pretty much what it is. In fact, many of you know the Superman game in 2007, 2008 that got canceled, by which we got to see leaks from. Now, for some of us, we didn't necessarily know the details surrounding it, but all that was because of the financial crash of 2007 and 8, that video game, the developers lost their publisher and no one else wanted to touch the game because everybody was holding back on their finances. And so the whole studio that was working on the game and the entire project just died because there was no financial support anymore. It wasn't Warner Brothers that was doing it at that time. It was an external studio. So this is definitely something that we have to take into consideration. But even back then, they were already able to create a Superman game that they could visualize. And if you go back and look at, say, maybe Unreal Engine 3, when Tim Sweeney and the Epic Games crew took that engine a little bit more mainstream, you'll see that that engine was already quite capable of a lot of things. Now, some people have argued that Unreal Engine 3, this is one of the engines that was been out there, the one that actually was used to make the Arkham games, could not make a Superman game. I disagree. I think that engine could have done it, but even if we made that argument, by the time, say, Batman Arkham Knight was already released, Unreal Engine 4 was more than likely entering its beta stage of testing and even use. So at that time, Unreal Engine 4 could have possibly even done the job if that was the case. I think what it is the financial side. That financial burn that studio had back in 2007 probably sent a really interesting message to a lot of different publishers out there. And I think that message is very straightforward. The fact that other publishers did not want to touch the game at that time possibly sent a message that maybe this hero is not as fiscally, how would I put it, advantageous for us. So why should we bother continuing to make another Superman game? And this is the problem with big video game production. Many companies that have the cash will go where the money is. I don't think many of these companies believe that Superman is a money maker. This is why I think the character has been abandoned for the most part. So you think about, say, the part of, say, maybe Superman might be OP. There's a case for that, but I think that comes from just different representations of him with very minimal consistency. But then you go back, say, to the technology hindrances that have been cited, and I disagree with that. I think there's technology. I think overall, it's the money side that continues to hold this character's representation back. I would love to hear your thoughts nonetheless about all of this, because I strongly believe that this character has so much potential. It just hasn't been able to get into the right hands. And, honestly, because of the way the character is so, in a sense, or his representation, and this is Superman, has been so complicated, many of the, in quote, right hands may not want to touch this character. It's quite sad. We may never see a Superman game. Anyways, talk to me in the comment section, and if we ever see a Superman game, then make sure you come to this video and laugh at me. I'll be happy for you to do that. Peace out.